Hi, everyone. My name is Paul Loya. I'm here at the Tustin Area Historical Museum. I'm excited about sharing with you a little bit about Emperor Norton I, also known as Joshua Abraham Norton. American history is filled with eccentric people who have delighted, awed, and even scarily bemused us with their behavior. People such as Johnny Appleseed, Howard Hughes, Bobby Fischer, Marlon Brando, and even Nicolas Cage to some extent. But Emperor Norton may be the most interesting, delusional, and beloved of them all. So let's get into a little bit about Emperor Norton. He was born February 4th, 1818, or even 1819. We're not very sure. This is a great photograph of him as an early adult. He was born in Deptford, London, and depending on what you believe or some of the accounts, firsthand accounts, detail his birth date and his entrance into Ellis Island. He was born Joshua Abraham Norton. He died in San Francisco, California on January 8th, 1880 at age 61, originally buried in the Masonic Cemetery in San Francisco. But in 1934, San Francisco decided to value their living over their dead, and thousands of people were disinterred and reinterred to Coleman, California, the emperor being one of them. So his parents were John Norton and Sarah Norden. They were both Ashkenazi Jews of Eastern Europe. His father was a hardworking master craftsman. And in Matthew Rivers' book, The Emperor of the United States, he talked about Joshua's father by saying, the rattle of trade and commerce was the metronome of his life, setting the rhythm of his everyday life. Matthew Rivers also said Norton's mother was the quiet pillar of the family. In 1820, the family moved from London to South Africa in search of a better life and brighter future. This is an important event in young Joshua's life. In 1849, Joshua Abraham Norton arrives in San Francisco at the beginning of the gold rush. He arrived with $40,000 from his inheritance, which is a lot of money back in 1849. He was a wealthy, wealthy man. He engaged in commodity trading, and it was said that he skillfully speculated on rice and flour, and he understood their value. The emperor had his business in a building owned by William Tecumseh Sherman, the soon-to-be Civil War hero. Levi Strauss had his store just around the corner on Sacramento Street. And no, it wasn't 501 Sacramento Street. It was actually 90 Sacramento Street. Then he moved to 62 Sacramento Street. Real estate was also part of his portfolio, and he purchased property throughout parts of San Francisco, which had just changed its name 2 years prior from Yerba Buena, which means good herb. It was named after a common plant in the area. But in 1854, Joshua Norton was told that China was in a famine and had little to no rice. And you and I can laugh about that today because thinking that China doesn't have any rice is kind of a foolish thing to believe in. But there was a ship called Glide pulled into San Francisco Harbor from Peru with rice. And Mr. Norton purchased all the rice, thinking that he would corner the market, he would set the price, he would sell it, and turn an extremely large profit. However, more ships came from Peru with rice, and the price plummeted, and Norton not only lost his fortune, but he lost his tether to reality as well. Refusing to admit defeat, he filed lawsuits stating that the rice was of inferior quality, and eventually the legal death blow came when the California Supreme Court ruled against him. He lost his fortune and his status as a merchant and businessman. Now, I know what you're thinking. This guy's the emperor. What's he going to be doing for money? Well, he did sell advertisements for specialized goods in the local newspapers, including things like trinkets, cutlery, fabrics, even specialized construction and industrial equipment via newspapers, like I said, as he fought to stay relevant and stay in the public eye. In his book, Norton I, the Emperor of the United States, William Drury says he did not retreat to the shadows. He crafted an ongoing narrative around himself, one that was steeped in audacity. There's the book, The Emperor of the United States by Matthew Rivers. I love that photograph. Anyway, with the failure of the market crash, the loss of his fortune, having to sell his properties, the emperor doubled down and crafted his next step. And this is what makes him so unique. On September 7th, 1859, a date which will live in ignominy, he walked into the office of the San Francisco Daily Evening Bulletin and hand delivered a letter which was to run the next day. He declared himself to be the emperor of these United States, and he ordered the states to send delegates to him by February in order to make such alterations in the existing laws of the Union as may ameliorate the evils under which this country is laboring. Declarations continued to come in as quickly as his now deranged mind could imagine. I love that he created this new persona, so obviously fake that I swear it reminds me of the story of the emperor with no clothes, where the emperor wears nothing at all, but everyone is afraid to tell him the truth. So on October 12th, 1859, he abolished the United States Congress because of the undue influence of political sects. When Congress failed to comply, he ordered Major General Winfield Scott, the use of the U.S. Army, to clear the halls of Congress. When General Scott did not comply, it did not stop him from continuing to make over 500 declarations in newspapers throughout San Francisco. Some of the declarations were actually ahead of their time and have relevance today. 1872, Norton decreed that the city should build a bridge between Oakland and San Francisco, as well as a tunnel to ensure passageway between the two cities. Interestingly enough, the city would take 50 years to build the Bay Bridge and the Trans-Bay Tube Underground. My favorite decree was that the emperor hated that people referred to San Francisco as Frisco. So in one of his decrees, he says, whoever after due and proper warning shall be heard to utter the word Frisco, which has no linguistic or other warrant, shall pay into the imperial treasury as penalty the sum of $25. That's over $600 in today's currency. Emperor Norton was the San Francisco's first celebrity of the people. In 1861, the Civil War was raging and many deserters would sell their uniforms so as not to be found. Civil War uniforms were ubiquitous and easily accessible, and they were pretty cheap to purchase. So the emperor bought his famous kepi hat, the little hat there. He bought his kepi hat, a tunic complete with epaulets and saber. He would continue to wear this regalia the rest of his life. And even though he was the emperor, he still appeared pretty slovenly in his dress. But I think it endeared him to the people, who he called his subjects. Adored by the common man, he would frequent local stores and write about them in his decrees. So stores would provide him free food. Kids loved him. He gave them gifts, trinkets, and always had general small talk with anyone. He was seen at bars, stores, shops, and almost everyone gave him free food, or what you would call today swag or merchandise. All right. I love this photo. This is a great photo of San Francisco's two most famous stray dogs, Bummer and Lazarus, with His Majesty begging for food. Apparently, His Majesty hated this photo as he didn't see himself as a beggar. He saw himself as collecting the imperial tax for the imperial treasury. Anyway, they call this photo the Three Beggars. It was considered bad business if you didn't give the emperor free food. As a means of income, the emperor got someone to print bonds, and he would use them. He would sell them and in 50 cents, $5, and $10 denominations. This would allow the emperor to live and exist off a meager income. His Majesty would also go to local merchants and tell the owners that they were in arrears from the imperial treasury, and the owner would give him $2 to $3 because he knew San Francisco was making money off of him by selling merchandise of his likeness. So at the time of His Majesty, there were two types of patrolmen in San Francisco, local and regular patrolmen. The chief of police was authorized to employ 100 patrolmen. However, he only employed 72 at the time, and the other 28 were employed by districts within San Francisco. Now, the catch was the regular patrolman could patrol the entire city, while the local patrolmen could only patrol the districts that employed them. Pay was not equal, and regular patrolmen looked down on the local patrolmen. Well, on the night of January 21st, 1867, His Majesty walked into the Palace Hotel, not the current Palace Hotel, but a rundown earlier version of it. Shabbily dressed, he was asked to leave. His Majesty would not leave, and as a matter of fact, he doubled down and asked them for an apology. The proprietor called the police, and local officer Armand Barbier arrested the emperor on charges of vagrancy. While at the station, the emperor actually produced $4.75 and a room key, which means that he didn't meet the criteria for vagrancy. The charges had to be dropped. The criteria for vagrancy at the time was someone was not to have any money nor a place to stay. As the emperor had money and an obvious place to stay, the charges had to be dropped. Well, local patrolman Barbier was embarrassed, so he changed the charges to being of unsound mind and could be a danger to himself, which landed His Majesty in jail for the night. Running on a platform of police reform, Chief Patrick Crowley knew he had a PR nightmare. He was right. When the next day San Francisco was outraged at the fact that they had arrested the emperor. And here's what the headlines read. In what can only be described as the most dastardly of errors, Joshua A. Norton was arrested today in the Palace Hotel. He is being held on the ludicrous charge of lunacy. Known and loved by all San Franciscans as Emperor Norton, the kindly monarch of Montgomery Street is less a lunatic than those who engineered these trumped-up charges, as they will learn when His Majesty's loyal subjects are fully apprised of this outrage. No hearing was held. The police dropped all the charges against His Majesty. And apparently His Majesty forgave Officer Barbieri, granting him a royal pardon in view of his youth. Well, in retrospect, it really didn't help the emperor's case. For the 1870 federal census, his occupation would be listed as emperor. So as you can see in this particular slide, you see that midway, the highlighted part, it says Norton Joshua, age 50, and under occupation, it says emperor. And if you slide right, the condition would be labeled as insane. At age 57, the emperor knew that he needed or wanted an empress, so he turned his eyes on 16-year-old Minnie Wakeman, born Mary Lincoln Minnie Wakeman Curtis, whose father was the famous sea captain Ned Wakeman, who was a good friend of Mark Twain. And when Mark Twain wrote the book Captain Stormfield's Visit to Heaven, he used Ned Wakeman as his inspiration. Captain Wakeman had 3 children, with Minnie being the eldest. The emperor must have seen the captain's daughter when he attended Oakland High School's graduation, because shortly after, he wrote her a letter. My dear Miss Wakeman, in arranging for my empress, I shall be delighted if you will permit me to make use of your name. Should you be willing, please let me know, but keep your own secret. It is a safer way, I think. Your devoted, loving friend, the emperor. She wrote back and said thank you in a gracious manner, but she declined on the basis she was already engaged, which was actually true. The sad part is that she wrote the emperor the letter. Well, I'm sorry. She was engaged. She wrote a letter back to the emperor describing that she was declining. However, the emperor had taken off to Sacramento for the legislative term, and he was gone for 2 weeks. But on his way back, he stopped by Miss Wakeman's house because in his mind, he had never heard from her. Minnie's mother met him at the door and broke the news of the unrequited love. When he got back, he was given his mail, and there it was, Minnie's letter detailing the rejection. I love this photograph of the emperor riding his bike because in my mind's eye, I see the emperor riding a bike back to San Francisco. But the emperor wrote back the next day and says, my dear Minnie, I did not receive your note until this morning, having been absent nearly a fortnight attending the legislature. Otherwise, I would not have been so rude as to have called on you yesterday. Regret extremely your previous engagement. Hope if anything should occur to break it off, you will think of me who loves you to distraction. The state expects me to get my lady and travel to Washington, and I must look to the ladies to answer. Yours faithfully, Norton I. Emperor Norton also wrote back again the next day. My dear Miss Minnie Wakeman, the ladies of San Francisco have declared Miss B. Merrig Empress Norton I, hoping to have your consent. I am your affectionate friend, Norton I, Emperor. Minnie did keep her secret, and it wasn't until 1933, at the time of her death, that her letters were donated to the Bancroft Library, that the emperor's letters were made public. 1880 was always going to be a year of reckoning for His Majesty, as the bonds he had been selling for years to survive were now matured, and he needed to pay off the bonds. Ultimately, if everyone cashed in their bonds, he would be financially ruined again. People on the street, including children, would ask him, "Hey, Amp, are you going to pay up?" This was obviously on his mind, as he went to a friend who was a banker and printed more bonds, but at a much lower rate of return. On the rainy evening of January 8th, 1881, walking up a hill near California and DuPont, on his way to the Academy of Natural Sciences, where there was to be a debate of the Hastings Society, he fell over and never reached the hall. He would die later that night from a stroke at the old St. Mary's Hospital across the street, while rubberneckers watched in amazement. News of his death came quickly and was reported all over the world. He was buried in the Masonic Cemetery until 1934, when San Francisco decided to move their dead to make room for their living. On June 30th, 1934, here's a photograph of that in this particular slide. Even though he had been buried in the plot since April, an official rededication ceremony occurred with the press, dignitaries who gave the emperor his due with a respectful headstone stating, "Norton I, Emperor of the United States and Protector of Mexico, Joshua A. Norton, 1819 through 1880." Here's another picture of the actual grave. I was there a few months ago, and I've been to his grave a few times, and it's always fun to go there and see. And in his lifetime, he was a beloved character, a rags to riches, back to rags story, the forever mentally ill underdog who captured the heart of San Franciscans and whose legacy remains intact over 100 years after his death. There are buildings named after him. There are historical markers. There's websites. There's books. There was a movement that wanted to call the Bay Bridge the Emperor Norton Bridge. But most of all, we keep Edward Norton, William B. Ide, and William Monet's memory alive by talking and learning about these great characters, because we love history and we love a great story. It's great being with you today. Paul Loya, saying goodbye.